These are the 7 life-changing phases of spiritual awakening. And over the past 10 years or so, I've been helping people navigate through these phases and answering their questions about them. I did this presentation live recently to a live audience, and they found it very useful, so I wanted to create this video. Now, as we go through these stages, we'll explain what each one means, how you can move to the next stage, and how to recognize where you are and which phase you might be in. I've got a quick warning before we get into phase number 1, and that's to do with the spiritual police. And also, there's a shocking twist about these phases at the end. But in terms of the spiritual police, they are out there, they do exist, and they will say things like, there are no such things as phases of spiritual awakening. You cannot categorize in this way. There is no person, and therefore, how could you even create training that helps people through this? All of that is kind of taken with a Himalayan-sized grain of salt. Because what I found is when I was going through my awakening and my spiritual journey, I was frustrated. I didn't know where I was. Was I moving along? Was I going backwards? Was I on track? You need to know this stuff until you kind of don't. But until that point, you need to know. So let's get started with the first phase. And the first phase is ignite. And you'll see there's a little lit fuse here. So ignite is where the ignition happens of the fuse of awakening or enlightenment. This is where there is a spark of inquiry. It can come about as a result of something very bad happening in your life. It could be the loss of a loved one, could be grief, could be losing your job, could be losing health or something like that. There could be something negative or seemingly negative which sparks this level of inquiry and sparks an investigation into the spiritual realm. For example, dissatisfaction with the outside world, with the tangible, with the material, and that can lead to a spark, and this spark lights the fuse. That's one way. Another way is actually achieving seemingly very, very positive things in life and realizing that there's actually emptiness there. They don't fulfill you. Like, getting married, having a family, getting a great job, making a ton of money, all these things that people say, oh, well, if you have all of this, you'll be permanently happy. If you get those things and you realize actually, well, of course they're great, but it doesn't last forever. Like that happiness doesn't give you that permanent sort of state and feeling of satisfaction and contentment. So that too can lead to this spark of inquiry. The other way that this ignition or this ignite phase can occur is essentially from truth itself igniting itself. Because at the absolute level, while initially in the early stages of the journey, in these early phases, it might feel like you're doing this and you're moving through this, at the zoomed out absolute level, it's really just awareness or consciousness or truth itself that's ignited itself. It's discovering the nature of itself. You never discover something new, you just remember what you always were. So there can seem to be a reason for this ignition, for this spark and this igniting phase, sometimes very bad things, sometimes very good things, sometimes disillusionment with the material world. Sometimes it can just happen for no apparent reason. I've had people come to me in the past who've done very normal everyday things. They were not on the seeking path, and all of a sudden they kind of felt like they'd lost their sense of a separate self. They'd fallen into oneness and this state of consciousness and awareness, and they weren't even asking for it. So that's an example of truth or awareness waking up to itself. So that's the first phase. Now, during this phase, how do you recognize this? Well, it feels exciting. It feels, as this fuse has been lit, it kind of lights up life in a sense. It feels like there's some hope finally, light at the end of the tunnel, and you feel that there's something happening that cannot be undone. And very truthfully, the lighting, the ignition of this fuse cannot be reversed. Once the fuse is lit, it is going to go bang, and it is going to lead to what happens next, which we'll come on to in a moment. You can't stop that. You can't reverse it. You can't undo that. So this ignite phase feels very exciting. It feels like, and possibly like energy is starting to build up in some sense from a physical point of view. From a mental point of view, the mind is almost playing catch up, like what's going on? There's something happening, but I don't quite understand it. and you can start to see things in different ways. You might hear different things. Your perceptions can get heightened in this time. So you might see things out of the corner of your eye that maybe you've never seen before. Feels like you've got a wider field of vision. All of these things can happen in this initial phase. This leads us to the second phase, which is takeoff. Okay, takeoff, because the fuse that is lit is lighting a rocket. Now, for the purposes of this metaphor, and all metaphors have flaws, but I'm trying to develop a metaphor here that covers all the different phases in the most accurate way that I can. But words are not going to describe reality in the truest possible way, and nor can any metaphor. But in this metaphor, the rocket is a firework. It's not like a rocket ship. It's a firework rocket, okay? One that you stick in the ground on a stick, you light the fuse, and it starts to vibrate as the thing takes off, okay? So phase 2 is this takeoff phase. It's where the rocket at this point, which obviously kind of represents you, is neither shooting up nor fully embedded in the ground. It's kind of in this limbo phase. It's just, that moment just before the rocket goes shoo. It's that moment where it's just broken free from its tether on the ground, but it's not shot into the air yet. It's kind of got that huge outburst of energy. And that's really what typifies phase 2, the takeoff phase, is the spark has been lit of inquiry, and now the journey has properly begun. Like you feel a release of energy. Some people talk about the crown chakra opening, energy leaving the body, sometimes shakes, sometimes jitters. It feels maybe sleep patterns are interrupted, maybe your digestion and your eating patterns and routines are disrupted. There's something going on, right? On an energy level with this bag of bones at this stage, okay? Now, at this point, in this phase 2 of takeoff, it's exciting. It feels simultaneously kind of exhilarating, but also a little bit intimidating, a little bit worrying, because you're not quite sure where you're heading off to in the future, what's going to happen. Also, at the same time, you feel like you're going to leave the ground behind. And the ground, in this sense, in this metaphor, represents, a grounded sense of what you thought reality was, like life, everyday life, sort of your common life, as it were. You're about to leave all of that behind, and you sense that, right? And the energy is representative of that. So that's phase 2. These get progressively more, let's say, violent. I want to choose a different word, but I don't mean violent in a negative sense. I just mean from an energy point of view and from a transformational point of view, they get more extreme as we go on. Phase 3 is the ascend phase. Okay, the ascend phase. So this is where the rocket begins to ascend. This is where you leave the ground behind. You leave that old life behind. You start to ascend spiritually. Now, before this time, you've probably gone left and right in life. Okay, you've reached out. You've gone from where you are and you've reached out to get something. I'll try and get a better job, see if that gets me happy. I'll get a better partner, a better relationship, or I'll get better health. And you go out laterally along the way to try and find this happiness that we all seek, because there's constantly this sense of lack, like nothing is enough. You feel you're not good enough. But the good news is you are not a problem to solve. You're not something that needs fixing in any way at all. There is never anything wrong with you or what is. That's kind of like the spoiler alert, okay? And yet we feel that when we still associate with this sense of separate self, we feel this sense of lack. We feel that we're not good enough, that life is never good enough. We're constantly trying to gather things, gather experiences, sensations, relationships, objects, income, status, to try and fill this unfillable void that we feel, okay? So during this ascend phase, rather than going left and right and laterally to try and fulfill that, the ascension phase is a different axis. So you're finally going in a different dimension, right? In the spiritual dimension. You're not going out into the material world to try and satisfy this. You're saying, actually, let's go up. Let's go to the spiritual dimension and see if there are any answers there. Now, the pitfall at this point, a potential trap, and many people fall into this, is, and I did the same many years ago, earlier on in my journey, is you substitute one material thing for a spiritual thing. And you say, oh, well, yeah, of course, getting more money or getting a better job or more experiences in the real world, of course, that's not going to fulfill me. It's not going to lead to permanent happiness. Let me go into the spiritual realm. But you treat it in the same way, and you start collecting spiritual books, spiritual experiences in meditation, spiritual trainings during retreats. And it's a very subtle displacing of what you thought was what you've realized is not going to work in the material world, and you've just switched it for the spiritual world. But the outcome is going to be the same. It's not going to give you the result. Okay, so there is a risk and there is a trap there that you can fall into that during this ascent phase. Now, the key through all of this, even though you cannot do this, but the mind always wants a doing action, is to just allow everything to be as it is. That's really the simple instruction of all of spirituality, which is a non-doing instruction. Allow everything to be as it is. How do I do that? You're already doing it, okay? Just allow everything to be as it is. So during this ascension phase, what's happening is you're leaving that world behind, you're leaving the physical behind, and you're starting to now explore the spiritual realm, and you're starting to see things. You gain better perspective. You look down on where you were, not in a bad way, you're not looking down it, but you gain perspective. You see things in a different way. And that's really what life is, and really what the world is not what you see. The world is how you see. So you start to gain this perspective that, oh, wow, it's different to what I thought. Now that I'm up here, now that I've ascended in a certain sense and have a new perspective, I can see that what I thought things were is not actually what they were. And I'll explain more on that in a moment. So that's the ascension phase. Again, it can feel very energetic. It can feel quite mesmerizing, also disorientating. It can affect the stomach as you're kind of shooting up. In this ascension phase, literally, it can affect the stomach. It can lead to feelings of existential angst, like, is this the end of me? Is this the end of my life? Am I dying? What's going to happen? Where am I going? What's happened to what I've left behind? Now I've looked down there and I see that it's not the answer. What's going to happen to that? How do I re-engage with all of that? Okay, so all of these kind of questions are going on at this phase. Phase 4 is the explode phase. Okay, at this point, the rocket has reached reach the upper limits of the sky, reach the dark night sky, and it explodes. This is the explode phase. So at this point, it explodes into nothing. Okay, it explodes into nothing. And really, can be a realization at this phase that during that explosion, this is the kind of the oneness experience. You may have had this, you may have heard people talk about this, where they experience everything as being the same. Everything is just one thing. And I don't mean from like a peace and love 1960s, one love, one peace kind of thing. I mean literally a very visceral knowing that everything is the same. That when you look at any object or any experience or any emotional sensation or perception, it's just you observing yourself. Another way this has been phrased is that you're seeking God or spirituality or awareness or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that all that there is, you're seeking that with its eyes. So you already are that. Another phrase that is used to describe this is everything you see is God's face. Now, again, I don't want to give this religious connotations. The word God is very loaded with religious connotations, obviously, but I'm just using that word as it could be spirituality, consciousness, awareness, global consciousness, all that there is. Whatever word you choose to define this, everything, the universe, you are that. Okay, and this explosion phase, it's really not a physical explosion. Obviously, you don't physically discombobulate, but the idea of you being a separate self is exploded. Not temporarily, not in a kind of intellectual way of, oh yeah, I kind of get it. I'm not separate. Of course, how could I be? I'm in the universe. I am the universe. But I mean, on a very visceral level, the idea that you could ever be a separate self and that you were ever separate to all of this is permanently exploded. So at that point, you kind of, it's known permanently that you are everything and that everything is you. And I don't mean that from an ego sense, not like, oh, like me, this individual here, John Smith or John Doe or whatever, I here am everything and I'm the almighty. No, I just mean quite the opposite, that everything that you see, the tree, the bird, the sky, is you just as much as this is you. There's no separation. It's the end of separation. That explosion marks the end of separation. Now, people experience this in different ways. I've experienced it initially through one time I was looking out in a field, a group of fields. I was out in the countryside and the fields were divided, all the different farmers' fields, and there were houses in the distance and all these different things. And then suddenly it just hit me, this is awareness that there was no divide through any of this. It was literally, I was gazing out upon the world as a vast oneness, and even the watching and the seeing of this was also the oneness. And there was no separation and division to any of it. On another occasion, I have been, observing and seeing that every single item, every aspect of so-called matter is made of the same stuff, whether it's person, fence, water, me, mirror, reflection. It's just, it was just known, again, permanently known, that it's all the same. And it kind of emanated this glow of kind of lovingness, basically, is the only way to describe it. Everything went from being hostile and cold, and everything that wasn't part of this particular aspect of the oneness was kind of hostile and cold, unless obviously I knew them and they were family and whatever. But after this kind of realization, it was permanently seen and always seen that everything, rather than being cold and hostile, was actually me, and was essentially love or God or awareness or spirit, everything. And what was seeing it was the same thing. Again, difficult to describe, but I'm trying to do my best. So you may have had these similar kind of experiences or feelings. The way, or sensations, the way to know if it's kind of fully established is it's literally like you've seen through a different eye. That's why, we talk about the third eye. It's literally like you've seen something that you can never unsee, and you always see with the eye in future. Like it's just always there. You don't remind yourself, oh yeah, remember how I had that thing where everything's oneness? Let me try and get that back. No, it's not that. It's just, it's always known. It's always known. Okay, so that is the explosion phase. It's kind of the explosion into everything. Phase number 5 of 7 is disappear. Okay, the disappearance phase, which sounds a little bit terrifying, and it can be. This phase is, because you've kind of realized that you are everything, you disappear as a separate self. There's no real identity. You realize simultaneously that everything is you, you are everything is all there is. And simultaneously, the separate self here disappears. So there's just I here, I looking at I, using I. Again, it's difficult to describe, but it's a complete disappearance of the notion of a separate self. Now, another way to think of this is like a starfish. Now, if you imagine a starfish, it's got, whatever it is, 5 legs, is it? I don't know. 5-legged starfish. But underneath the starfish, it's got all these tiny little tentacles. The tiny little suckers? Thousands of these things, right? Now, it's as if you imagine just part of this starfish, maybe just one of these teeny weeny little tentacle sucker things, was touching the ocean, and the rest of it was on the dry beach, on the dry sand. Okay. Now imagine this one tentacle, tiny little tentacle sucker thing that's touching the ocean. It's like, oh, I'm wet, I'm in the water. I should really try and tell the other millions and thousands of tentacles over there, I should tell them that I'm wet and what it's like to be wet. I should tell them, because they don't know, because they're on dry land. But the point is, there are no separate tentacles. There is only starfish. So it's the same. There's no separate self. Essentially, I am kind of using this metaphor. I'm referring to individuals. So you as a tentacle, tiny little tentacle on the underside of starfish, and the starfish represents all that there is. So you are all that there is. You're not that separate little tentacle. You might think that you've got some sort of agency in the world and you can change things and move things, but it's the starfish that's actually moving. The starfish already knows what it is. You see, the starfish already knows. So this is the phase, the disappearance phase, which number 5, which can be disorientating, can be quite alarming, because you feel, well, I've kind of gone now. Like my former life's gone. Like, how on earth? Because again, you can't go back on this. You can't say, you know what, I'm going to forget I experienced this. I'm going to forget that I know this. I'm going to forget that I kind of yearned this. And now I've lit the spark and I've gone up and I've exploded. I'll just go back to what I was. It doesn't work. I tried over the years to do that, to try and put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak. You cannot do it. You cannot do it. The best way I can describe this is like you have this engine. I had this engine inside me, and it had been driving all my life, like 40 years or whatever, 30 odd years, driving away, driving every decision, driving forward, motivating everything I was doing, yearning this sense of lack and have to go out in the world and do this and get this and conquer this and be better than this. And at this stage, or during these phases, that engine was ripped out completely and it never got replaced because it didn't really exist. And there's no way you could get it back. You can't pretend, right? The only thing, because you'll find yourself doing this, I know I did, that you'll pretend to yourself that what you know is not true. You'll sort of pretend, oh no, I'm just pretending to myself that I'm kind of going through this awakening. I'm just pretending that I get this. I'm pretending that I experience this. I only have it intellectually. That's another good one that people say, to pretend. I get it intellectually, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not embodied. I'm not permanently in this state of bliss and awareness. It's not that. Enlightenment is not that. Awakening is not that. That's a complete misconception. The only way you can pretend is to pretend that you're not awakened, that you're not awakening. And we're very convincing at doing that. The mind loves to play that game and go back and forth, say, no, you're not. You know, it'll take with one hand, give with one hand, take away. And say, oh yeah, you've realized this, you've got this, that's really good. You've seen this oneness, blah, blah, blah. You realize that you're not separate. And then the mind will come and say, yeah, but you're not feeling it all the time. Sometimes you swear when you get frustrated, you cut people up when you're driving, and the mind does this takeaway job on you. That is pretending. That's pretending that you're not awakened. You cannot undo this, okay? So that's phase 5, disappearing. At this point, obviously the fireworks exploded, and now we enter phase 6, which is freefall. This is where the ashes and the dust of the exploded firework begin to slowly drift to the ground. And at this point, obviously you're at the highest point, you have the greatest perspective, but you no longer exist. And this is what I was saying earlier on, that the person that you were that starts this journey, the person does not exist when you end the journey. That's the whole point. You go towards what you have always been. You just unbecome what you never were. And during this freefall phase, you're kind of falling back down to earth. Right? It's not that you live up in the stars and, that awakened people or people that have kind of realized this. It's not that they're, deities, or they're walking around on clouds every day. They still, go to the toilet. They still have problems. There's still things going on in their life. They still get frustrated. They still swear. They still cut up traffic. They still do these things, but everything's viewed from a different perspective. The deeper truth beyond this kind of illusion is seen. So in this freefall phase, at this point, it's not really known what's going to happen. You're drifting back down to earth, back down to the life that you left behind. You're going to have to somehow assimilate or reassimilate back to your life and your family and friends and a job or whatever, and come back down to earth. This is probably the most terrifying phase of all. It's sometimes referred to as the dark night of the soul, where you just feel like everything's lost. Like, you deeply yearned this, you yearned this truth, and you yearned it more than anything else. And it seems to, apparently at this phase, it apparently seems to have destroyed everything that you held dear. Your sense of a separate self, the world, the life that you'd built up, and the notion of what you thought this was going to give you is completely destroyed, because there is nobody to get anything anyway. There's literally no person left at this point. No separate self. So this floating down to the ground is a real sort of discombobulation. For me, this was a several month period of inability to really operate at a human level, like not able to really engage in work or relationships or communicate in any way. Very, very close to depression, I would say. And it's difficult. And one of the things that I tried to do is, because this is what's said in spirituality, is that you should let go, just go with the flow, do nothing. So I kind of thought I was doing that, but I was actively doing nothing. So this is the metaphor of the river. If you think of life as a river, Before the spiritual inquiry, what you end up doing is you try and go against the river. You try and swim against the river. You try and shape the river to your will. You try and get what you want from the river. With spiritual inquiry, then what happens is you kind of begin to let go a little bit. And what I was doing in this phase was standing in the river like this, trying to stop it. Like, I'm not doing anything. I would tell myself, I'm not doing anything. I'm doing nothing. I'm letting go. I'm not swimming upstream, but I was still getting in the way of life. Whereas really, I just needed to realize that I am the river and just float downstream. So there's a subtle difference between letting go actively, like I'm letting go, I'm doing nothing, right? And then inactively letting go and truly floating and going with the flow of whatever life and this everything that there is, where that takes itself. It's tricky. It's the only thing I can say about this phase. But eventually, you will come to phase number 7, which is the embody phase. Now, this is the longest phase of all because it never ends. The embodiment phase. And this is where you take everything that you've realized, you take the truth that you've known, you take the experiences, and you begin to embody it in human form. Because when you get down to earth, just like the fireworks, after a load of fireworks have been set off, there's still all these wooden sticks on the ground. You know, they sent the rocket up, the rocket exploded, but the stick, the body, if you like, the bag of bones here, is still there on the ground. That's the awkward bit. It's not like you disappear into this halo and you're just like nothing. There's still the body to be taken care of. And this embodiment phase is really about being very intuitive about what you're being called to do. And there's kind of 2 main aspects that can help you with this. And again, this took me a long time to kind of get, if you like. One is a devotion. One is devotion. So devotion is devotion to the truth that you've experienced. By devotion, I mean a devotion to spread the word about it, to help others, to teach others, to pass it on. Maybe not even in a direct way, but just in the way that you interact with the world, the way that you move in the world, the way that you communicate, is from that point of truth, from the deepest thing that you know to be true. That's devotion. And the second one is duty. Right, there is still a duty, and people get this mixed up, and they think, okay, now that I'm awakened, I've realized all this, and everything is just all that there is, and I'm not separate to it. There is no separate self. I don't need to do anything. I just play video games all day, or whatever. Go and live in a hut. But there's still a duty. There's still a duty to the body mind. We're not saying this doesn't exist. We're just saying it's not separate. It's still part of all that there is. And the duty to it is now greater once you understand that this is you, that is you, everything is you. The duty to all of this is far greater than when it was just, you thought it was just this bag of bones that you had a duty to, and you were trying to shape and manipulate everything else. When you realize that everything is all that there is and you are that, your duty level increases, right? So you have a duty to this, you have a duty to the body, to the mind, to friends, to family, to the community. That helps shape how you move in the world. And it's all in line with the devotion to the truth that you've experienced and the truth that you know. So that then takes you to these full 7 steps: ignite, take off, ascend, explode, disappear, free fall, and embody. I hope this has helped you.